So a couple months ago, Food and Wine featured Pazole on their cover, and it's just stuck in my mind ever since. I looked into a lot of different folklore associated with it, that it's typically made on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. Why this is, I was really intrigued by it, and I just learned so much about Pazole that I wanted to share it with everyone. I thought it was just awesome, all the stuff that I found out. So I was reading something in which Meghan Markle said that black-eyed peas and collard greens and cornbread and stuff like that were typically made as a New Year's Eve day, like first meal of the year for luck and prosperity in the new year. And similarly, hominy or pozole is the corn kernels that is in this Mexican stew. So kind of like how the black eyed peas swell when you cook them, the hominy and pozole does the same thing. So it's generally considered something that's a good sign of fortune and good luck in the new year. So also in Mexican traditions, corn is considered a sacred ingredient. So that's why this stew was made on special occasions in Mexico. So also in my studies of Pazole, I really learned some really kind of gruesome folklore that's associated with, in the sense that they say that back in the day, they would use the pozole in the special stew, and the prisoners that they would sacrifice, they would take their heart and religiously sacrifice them, and then use the body and chop it up and make it into stew. Don't worry, I didn't do that. I used pork. I stuck to the traditional rojo puerco recipe. There are no bodies and cannibalism in my pozole. But I thought it was really neat that was, traditionally what they have said to have done. And when the conquistadors came in like the 1500s, they said, yeah, no, I think you guys should leave the bodies out. So since then, they replaced it with pork. So I just thought that was like really interesting and really neat. So on New Year's Day, the first weekend of the new year, we decided to make pozole, and I learned a lot about it, and it was really interesting. So here we have a pork shoulder and spare ribs along with cilantro and mint. This is the basis that we're going to start the pork broth for our pozole. Generally, the recipe that I am basing everything off of called for country style pork ribs, which weren't really available, and it also said to go with something that was not lean. So I got the spare ribs in place of the country rib, and basically I ended up with the shoulder because I wanted something that was cost effective. Everything else was really expensive. This was like $6.99 a pound versus the spare ribs. If I was doing everything with spare ribs, which is what Whole Foods had available, it would have been like $11 a pound. So then we're putting everything into the stock pot, and this pork shoulder and the spare ribs are going to come to a boil, and then we're going to add some other aromatics, and we're going to make our stock, and it should take about 2 hours. I actually ended up being very happy with using the pork shoulder because it's a cut of meat that once it's fully cooked ends up breaking down and shredding apart really well. So I ended up being really happy that I chose to use that. And then also we could have browned the meat, but I went up for a straight up just kind of like a more white pork stock, and I ended up being really happy with the way it turned out. Next we're adding the tied bunch of cilantro and mint to our broth. So the pork came to a boil, we're turning it down to a simmer, we're adding the herbs, a quarter onion, white onion, 20 cloves of garlic, a couple of tablespoons of Mexican oregano, black peppercorns, bay leaves, and I'm going to add a couple dashes of cumin and coriander as well. Traditionally, you definitely start with water, but I could see starting with like a pork stock or even chicken stock to adding just a little bit more flavor initially to your liquid base. But we were able to extract a good amount of flavor just from starting with water. Now, there are so many different choices and ways you can personalize pozole. Primarily, the first ingredient in pozole is hominy. You can have dried hominy or canned hominy. The canned hominy is usually, well, first of all, what Pazole really is a large kernel of corn that has been shelled and dried typically. The canned kind, it's been soaked in usually lime and water for a very long time. So if you use the dried version, you need to soak it overnight. I opted to use the canned Pazole in this recipe. In addition to soaking overnight with the dried Pazole, you also need to boil it for a long time. So I guess just to cut down, while Pazole is simple in its number of ingredients, each step is really important to get the finished product the way that you want it. So for this recipe, I opted to use the canned hominy, I think just an ease to cut down on a number of steps. So we rinsed them off really well. Now we're patting them dry on this paper towel, and we're gonna toast them in the oven at 425 for about 12 to 18 minutes. Oh, they look so cute. If you've never tried hominy, what it basically tastes like is a puffed up corn tortilla. First and foremost, I guess, the biggest decision when you're making Pazole is which variation are you going to make. The green is with fresh green chilies, the red is with dried chilies, and the white is without chilies. As I said earlier, I chose to make the Puerco Rojo version, in which I used the dried red chilies. I learned a lot even just about dried chilies while I was doing this. The only dried chilies that I could find at Whole Foods and were readily available when I was gathering my ingredients were dried Anaheim chilies. My recipe called for ancho chilies and guajillo chilies. I definitely think that it makes a difference. The Anaheim chilies that I used were a little lackluster. I definitely think if I were to have used the ancho and the guajillo chilies that the recipe called for, it would have had a little more of a depth of flavor. So you're looking for, mild spice and smokiness to build a nice flavor profile. You're also, when you're steeping the chilies, so you're taking the whole dried chilies and soaking them in hot water for about 20 minutes should do it. Depending on the dryness of your chilies. And so while you're steeping them in this liquid, you're not only reconstituting them, but you're also kind of making a chili broth as well. What are you doing, Mom?
What am I doing?
Yeah. What are you working on?
I am working on taking the stems and seeds from the reconstituted Anaheim chilies.
Ooh, ooh. Is it a pain in the ass?
A little bit. And then I'm thinking as I'm doing it, I'm losing a lot of juice. And we needed to save the juice, but some of the peppers really soaked up like a lot.
That's interesting.
So I lost a lot. I would have thought about that differently next time, to save more of this juice and not just let it run all over my cutting board.
Yeah.
A few of these peppers didn't reconstitute as much as I would have liked. These seem a little dry compared to some of the other ones. They were sitting on top, so I think I'm going to just stick them back in the liquid once the seeds and stems are gone.
Smart. And then we're going to puree everything up with the remaining 6 garlic cloves from the recipe and a little bit of salt and some of the liquid. And then when we strain the broth, we're going to puree the onion and garlic that are in the broth. And that's what thickens our stew. What you're actually seeing here is the chili paste blending. After you've removed the stems and seeds, you're going to blend it up with a little bit of salt and the remaining garlic cloves in the recipe. And here you're seeing onion and garlic that were strained out of the pork broth with the addition of clove being blended to add back into the stew and help thicken it up. And then here at this time, after about 2.5 hours, you've strained your pork broth, and especially with that pork butt, you're going to see that it's nice and fork tender and really falling right off the bone. In this next clip here, you will see is kind of like our last step to the Pazole. You're basically going to pour the chili paste that we made into a hot pan or skillet on medium-high heat with a little bit of vegetable oil, and it will definitely splatter. I definitely recommend having a little shield.
Definitely still spattered everywhere.
Like Jackson Pollock's kitchen. Sorry, I can't get your head. I'm only filming your butt.
Oh, great. My best feature.
Well, now I got your shoulder.
my beefy one.
There we go.
My flat.
Mom, show them your shield. Show them your chili paste shield. Nice. Is it working?
Here we go.
Woo!
Not to save the rest of the kitchen. It's not back here. It's going everywhere.
Okay, so that's really everything at this time. You basically just combine everything. You have your pork broth, you have your chili paste, you have your blended onion and garlic puree, your shredded pork, and your Pazole or hominy. And you basically just combine everything together. Of course, taste and adjust seasoning as desired. And the one thing that I went back and forth about was the ratio of pork stock liquid to my chili paste and everything else. I ended up using all the pork stock that I made. Maybe you could pull that back a little bit in the future and adjust the ratios a little bit. But I was really happy with how ours came out. Now on to the toppings. Yay! Yet another way to personalize your Pazole. We use fresh diced jalapeno, red onion, lime juice, cilantro, avocado, a little bit of cheese, and tortilla chips. Cabbage, thinly sliced cabbage, and radishes are very common as well, but pretty much however you want to spice it up. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, a step-by-step, all-inclusive guide to Pazole, Puerco Rojo. I definitely want to make the verde version with the dried Pazole sometime in the spring when the fresh herbs and everything come out. So stay tuned for Pazole Part 2. And we're making the Pazole.
You said,
I don't know why it's Italiano, but we're making Pazole.
you're the one doing Spanish.